Arkwright, UK. For years, Arkwright was a popping coal mining area, but in 1988 they discovered that emissions of methane gas were seeping out from the ground beneath them. This was putting the lives of the residents at risk. Arkwright was then deemed too dangerous of an area to live in. As a result, the entire town had to be evacuated. Once everyone was out, it was destroyed to prevent people from ever living there again. Nowadays, there's not much left of the town, just an abandoned set of railway tracks and a plaque commemorating the area. In our 9th spot, we have Gilman, Colorado. Located in southeastern Eagle County, Colorado, Gilman was a beautiful town located on the edge of a cliff. But that wasn't the reason why this town was considered dangerous. Around 1984, the Environmental Protection Agency discovered hazardous levels of arsenic, cadmium, copper, lead, and zinc in the soil, surface, and groundwater of the area. It was so toxic that they demanded a full evacuation of the town. Now if you visit the area, you will see tons of signs warning trespassers. The signs say things like hidden and visible dangers, and risk of injury or death. Moving on at number 8, we have Dawson, New Mexico. Dawson was another area known for its mining. At the start of the 20th century, about 2,000 people lived in Dawson. Then in 1906, the mines were purchased by the Phelps Dodge Corporation. But on October 22, 1913, a terrible explosion occurred in the mine, and around 263 miners were killed. Then, 10 years later, on February 8, 1923, another explosion occurred. 123 miners were killed in this explosion. The mines remained operational until the 1950s, when they were finally deemed unsafe and shut down. Shortly after, the area was abandoned. Now if you visit Dawson, all you will see are rows upon rows of white crosses representing all the lives that were lost in the accidents. Coming in at number 7, we have Port Arthur, Tasmania. Port Arthur was once home to what was deemed as an inescapable prison. In fact, it was often called Australia's Alcatraz. From 1833 to 1853, Port Arthur was a place for convicted British criminals, mainly the biggest and the baddest ones. But in 1877, the prison was shut down. And then in 1895 and 1897, devastating fires destroyed most of the land. But in the 1900s, the area was turned into a tourist attraction with hope that it could escape its tragic past and, bring more positive vibes to the area. Sadly, this was not the case. In 1996, a man named Martin Bryant killed 35 people and wounded 23 more. This massacre is considered the worst massacre in the modern history of Australia. Now the area is abandoned. Its only visitors are the tourists that come to marvel at its history. Making our way down the list at number 6, we have Pitcher, Oklahoma. Pitcher, Oklahoma was once a popular lead and zinc mining town. In fact, a lot of families lived there. But in the mid-90s, a third of the younger population suffered from lead poisoning and were experiencing cognitive issues as a result. But that wasn't even the reason why the town was abandoned. They kind of just brushed that off to the side. In fact, they continued living there until 2006. That's when it was discovered that 86% of the buildings there were pretty much going to collapse at any given time. In fact, one motorist died after driving into a huge hole in the ground. After that was discovered, the population dropped to only 20 people. People fled so fast. Okay, so they're okay with a slow death through lead poisoning, but they draw the line at collapsing buildings? I don't know, I would have fled that area as soon as they said it was toxic. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Bodie, California. Bodie, California used to be the home to 10,000 residents. The reason why this area was so popular was because it had 30 mines. From 1878 to 1881, it was a booming area, but it wasn't the safest area to live in. Street fights, shootouts, and murders would happen daily. Then in 1932, a huge fire devastated the town. It destroyed most of the area. By the late 40s, the town only had a couple of residents, but they all ended up mysteriously dying. 2 were murdered, and 2 died from a mysterious illness. By the 1950s, it was a complete ghost town, with the emphasis on ghost, because apparently tons of spirits now haunt the area. Moving on at number 4, we have Beachwan, China. Back in 2008, Beachwan was hit with a magnitude 8.0 earthquake, the Wenchuan earthquake. This earthquake completely destroyed the area and killed thousands of residents. In fact, it caused 2 high schools to completely collapse, killing all inside of it. The earthquake destroyed 80% of the area and many people fled. A couple months later, the area was hit again by another earthquake, causing even more casualties. The town was then completely deserted. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. In 2013, the town was hit with a terrible flood. Now it remains completely abandoned. Only from time to time do people visit the area to pay their respects. In our third spot, we have Oradour-sur-Glane. Located in France, Oradour-sur-Glane was once a beautiful place to live. However, during World War II, it was the site of a horrific massacre. On June 10, 1944, the town was stormed by soldiers, and 642 of the residents were killed. The town was targeted since they supported the French resistance. Men were machine gunned down, whereas women were locked inside of a church and killed by grenades and explosives. Furthermore, most of the buildings were burnt down and destroyed. There were very little survivors. Those who did survive fled the area, abandoning it completely. Now all that's left are burnt down buildings, piles of bricks, and rusted cars. In our second spot, we have Treese, Kansas. During the early 20th century, Treese was rich in ore deposits. In fact, it supplied much of the ore used during the World Wars. But mining had to be stopped by the 1970s. It was discovered that the town's air was deadly. It was polluted with lead and other toxins. The whole area was surrounded with tons of lead and zinc mining waste. Not only was the air dangerous, but the ground was too. Hundreds of cave-ins and sinkholes occurred there. It was such a polluted area that it wasn't safe to live in at all. In fact, if you went swimming in the swimming holes, you would go home with reddened skin from chemical burns. That's how polluted the waters were. And eventually it was discovered that most of the residents were getting sick from lead poisoning. The Environmental Protection Agency eventually forced everyone out, except for 2 people who refused to leave. One ended up dying back in 2016. Now the area is attempting to be decontaminated, but even if that was successful, I can't imagine people wanting to move back there. And in our number 1 spot, we have Ludlow, Colorado. Ludlow, Colorado was once known for its coal mining. However, in 1913, thousands of miners went on strike to protest their work and living conditions. Over 1,000 workers and their families camped out by the mine as part of the protests. But in April of 1914, the town was the site of a horrific massacre. The Colorado National Guard and the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company guards surrounded the camp and shot and killed the protesters. The whole camp was burned to the ground, and countless lives were lost. After the massacre, Ludlow became a ghost town.
And at number 10, we have Pripyat, Ukraine, which was the city most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, an infamous incident that released a massive amount of radiation out into the world. The accident forced entire towns to abruptly empty out, and the area within a 19-mile radius of the plant was deemed uninhabitable for at least another 180 years. Absolutely insane. There are a ton of spooky photo ops, but the most famous is the decaying amusement parks. I mean, talk about creepy. How to visit the Chernobyl region is about 2 hours away, and tours range from private visits to multi-day itineraries. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure 1 day is enough for my itinerary. I don't need an itinerary because I'll remember what I'm doing and it's only lasting 1 day. At number 9, we have Kennecott, Alaska. Nearly 200 million worth of copper was processed in Kennecott, a self-contained mining town located in Wrangell Street, Ellis National Park from 1911 to 1938. Well, according to the National Park Services, as these stories usually go, the residents cleared out once the copper resources started to dwindle, and most of the buildings now have been abandoned for over 60 years. Well, there is hope on the horizon. However, the NPS MTS acquired many of the Kennecott's buildings and lands in 1998 and hoped to restore some of the buildings like the post office and the general store for modern use. Well, do you want to see a cool and creepy photo? Well, our pick would be empty skating rinks, you guys are seeing an empty tennis court, or how about visit the NPS run visitor center, which is open from Memorial Day through Labor Day, where you can actually pick up brochures or arrange a guided tour with the park ranger. Kennecott's Recreational Hall, which is fully restored in 2004, which is also available to rent for events. Next up, number 8, Bodie, California. Now this is one old west ghost town you're looking for. Once home to 10,000 people, Bodie boomed in the late 1880s after gold was found in the hills surrounding Mono Lake. Not long after though, Bodie transitioned into a period of steady decline until reaching ghost status around 1915 according to California Department of Parks and Recreation records. So why is this city such in great shape today? Well, you could thank the state of California for adopting the town and turning it into a state historic park in 1962. Coming in number 7 on this list, Waiuta, South Island, New Zealand. In the early 1900s, miners built a town right on top of a whole lot of gold-bearing quartz rocks, which would go on to produce 750,000 ounces of gold from 1.5 million tons of quartz. I'm kind of seeing a theme here where gold is creating immense popularity and wealth before destroying the very places it was found. People mine the gold, and then when it's all done, they get the heck out of there, leaving the town abandoned. Well, by the 1930s, the town had its own hospital, police station, and post office, plus a population of 600. The isolated city thrived until the main mining shaft collapsed, and that was back in 1951, forcing residents to abandon their town. Today, the Department of Conservation works to preserve the remaining buildings and hiking trails around the site. The department even converted one of the buildings, the Waiuta Lodge, into a 30-bunk facility for school groups and campers needing overnight accommodations. It is said that the original signpost pointing to a mining industry that no longer exists make for a great photo. Folks venture westward from Reefton on State Highway 7 and keep following the signs for Waiuta onto an unpaved road until you reach the spooky destination. You can explore on your own using the unmarked trails or a book tour in advance through friends. I don't know what friends would escort you through a haunted town, but it doesn't sound like great ones. I think you need to lose them. Number 6, we're bringing you Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Warning, this is quite a dark story. On June 10th, 1944, German troops raided the village of Oradour-sur-Glane and murdered 642 men, women, and children. Is this real life right now? Well, National Geographic reports, after the massacre, the military set fire to the churches, barns, and homes, leaving behind only a few surviving residents. The village has remained untouched since the horrific accident, serving as a shrine to those who died that June day. Number 5, we got Pyramidion Svalbard, Norway. The archipelago of Svalbard, located between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to about 2,145 humans. Not a lot. 1,000 polar bears and one seriously bone-chilling ghost town, Pyramidion, named for the pyramid-shaped mountain looming nearby. Pyramidion came to prominence in the 1930s, when the Soviets took ownership of the area's coal fields and quickly began mining operations. After World War II, they started spending more money on the enterprise, building hospitals, cafeterias, and houses, all in the block-style fashion typical of the Soviet-era architecture. The biggest hit came in 1996 when an airplane flying from Moscow to Svalbard crashes en route, killing all 141 passengers on board, many of them Pyramidion residents. The tragedy slashed morale, and it was fully abandoned in 1998. As for the site today, Rachel Newer of Smithsonian Magazine sums it up perfectly. It was as if several hundred people had abruptly stopped what they were doing and simply walked away. At number 4, we have Tamestown, Shanghai, China. China is a big fan of replica cities. In fact, Shanghai has 7 European-themed towns built to give wealthy residents a new place to call home. There's a Dutch-inspired canal-lined neighborhood, a Paris replica completed with a 300-foot Eiffel Tower, and even a slice of Sweden-inspired churches and Nordic houses included. But we're particularly fans of the Thames ghost town. A British copycat just 40 minutes from downtown Shanghai. Here you'll find a scale replica of the Christ Church, statue of Shakespeare and Winston Churchill, and even some familiar red telephone booths scattered here and there. As curiously cute as this mini city sounds on paper, well, it ended up being a complete failure. In fact, all of the 7 experimental towns are now pretty much abandoned. Well, how do you visit? Well, travelers are more than welcome to walk the cobblestone streets of all 7 replica cities. To get to the Thames town, they recommend taking the Shanghai Metro 9 to the Songjing Xing station, and because I'm pronouncing those words absolutely correct, you guys won't get lost. And then, if you make it to the station that I just said, you can take a taxi for the rest of the way. Only about 2.5 miles away and about $2 USD. Finally down, in at number 3 for abandoned towns you shouldn't visit, we're talking about the Great Saltire, Utah. And if you find yourself in Salt Lake City, Utah, you'll probably hear about the Great Salt Lake, or the Dead Sea of America, where you can float on the water. Now, I must tell you that you'll encounter corpses of dead seagulls, swarming flies, and a putrid odor. If you take the plunge, there's no way to miss the Saltire, a huge building with Moorish domes that you can see at the same time when you can smell the stench. The Saltire that you see now is actually the 3rd one. The first one was built in 1893 in order to provide a safe venue for recreation for families. It became immensely popular with all kinds of events until its pavilion and few other buildings were ravaged by the fire in 1925. Although it was built a second time, it never achieved the same popularity. In a period marked by the Great Depression, World War II, and several mishaps, it finally got destroyed in an arson fire in 1970. The third one was built in 1981, approximately a mile away from the original venue. But you kind of take away the whole history of it, so I can see why it never became as popular. Now, number 2 on this list, we have Silver City, Idaho, which was at one point one of the largest cities in Idaho. So just imagine one of the largest cities being abandoned. Imagine where I live in Toronto, I'm going out my door, and it's like, where did everybody go? Well, the town was established in the mid-1800s during the, well, you guys guessed it, the gold and silver rush of the western United States. By the 1880s, the town's population rose to 2,500 people. At its height in the 1880s, it was a gold and silver mining town with a population of around 2,500, and it had approximately 75 businesses. As mining in the area began to die down, so did the city. In 1942, the last mine in the area was closed. Well, you can still visit Silver City, which currently has around 70 buildings, including old churches, a hotel, and it has a lot of old homes that you can see. And finally, in at number 1, when it comes to the creepiest place in America, no one can miss Bannack Ghost Town because of its paranormal stories. This old mining town is located near Grasshopper Creek in Montana. The area is famous as a National Historic Landmark and operates as a state park in the US. The photos of this place are wild. Literally, it looks like the quintessential Wild Wild West. To enter Bannack, follow the easiest ways to get there. From Dillon, you can take the interstate highway route to quickly reach your destination. It was famous as a mining town, but then moved towards a visiting place, and gradually the town got empty from the residents before the 1960s. Now visitors come to explore the unlocked buildings.
Well, bring us off at number 10, Bannack, Montana, USA. So Bannack was founded in 1862 when John White discovered gold on Grasshopper Creek. 2 years later, it became the first territorial capital of Montana before it changed to Virginia City. At its peak, it had a population of 10,000 people. You know, quite a bit for back then. But the sheriff was accused by some of leading the ruthless band of road agents called the Innocents. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for the murders of over 100 innocent people, though historical records account for about 8. So it's kind of iffy. The sheriff and 2 deputies were hanged without trial in Bannack in 1864. 22 individuals were accused, informally tried, and hung by the Vigilance Committee, which is the Montana Vigilantes, of Bannack and Virginia City. So the city kept going into the 1930s with a fluctuating population, but then, in the 50s, gold workings dwindled, and then Bannack was declared a state park. The last residents left in the 70s. So all that with the Wild West, and then it's a state park now. Kind of funny. On to number 9, St. Elmo, Colorado, USA. So St. Elmo is the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, and it boasts the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. So it was settled in 1878 as Forest City and officially became St. Elmo in 1880. It was a gold mining settlement, just like many on this list, and the Mary Murphy mine recovered over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. It's just a lot of gold. But it's not a complete ghost town right now since it is privately owned with part-time inhabitants as of right now. You could even say the ghosts there are part-time inhabitants too. The most famous one is Dirty Annie. Her real name was Annabelle Stark, but she got her nickname Dirty Annie after her mother passed away. Annie and her brother were left to run the hotel their mother used to run while their father was in the mines. Since their mother was harsh and strict on cleanliness, after her passing, Annie would walk around in filthy clothing with her hair in a mess as a form of quiet rebellion. But anyways, some people say they have still seen her walking around the town, just strutting her stuff, hair a mess, filthy clothes. And then those who inherited the hotel swear the hotel went cold and all of the doors slammed shut when their grandchildren were playing inside. So could that have been Dirty Annie as well? Just toying with the kids? Number 8. Bodie, California, USA. So this ghost town sprung up after William Bodie hit gold in 1859. Then from 1877 to 1882 it had more than 10,000 residents and produced over 35 million in gold and silver. Also, at one point there were reported to be 65 saloons in town in addition to brothels, gambling halls, and opium dens. Like, it was the Wild West after all, but that's a lot of saloons. But sometimes that mix of money, gold, and alcohol would lead to unexpected fatalities. Newspapers reported that townspeople would ask in the mornings, "Have we a man for breakfast?" I don't know how to do a southern accent. Anyways, that meant, did anyone get killed last night? Because that's just how it was there. But not anymore. Now there are over 200 abandoned wooden buildings in what is Bodie State Historic Park. The buildings are not restored, but preserved. So you can go see a little bit of the Wild West yourself if you want. Number 7. Cerro Gordo, California, USA. So silver was discovered in Buena Vista Peak in 1865. Its discovery brought in miners, but also unsavory characters. At one point, the death rate was 1 person per week. There was no sheriff for miles around, and even the doctor fled the town, scared for his life. Basically, it had a reputation for death. So once Union Mine closed down in 1938, the population also died down. As of right now, there is one resident, Robert de Moraes, who is coincidentally a former miner. He serves as the town's unofficial caretaker. Number 6. Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peake's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it, and the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's ghost. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It processed nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grand, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected two sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlinga, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlinga Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Chisos Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, you know? Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses, and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Buddville to Bloodville, literally. Buddville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much.
Coming in at number 10, we have Audley's Town. Historians are baffled by the lost county down Irish village of Audley's Town. The town was run by landowner, the then Lord of the Land Viscount Bangor, who lived in the town's manor, Castlewood. When he died, his wife remarried and evicted all of the townsfolk. She then sent them off on a boat called the Rose, and they were told to set sail to Boston. The Rose left in 1852, but the boat never arrived in the New World. Some say that Lady Bangor's new husband, Major Savage Nugent, hated the townfolk and had them killed. These days the town is covered over by woodland, and part of the disappeared town was used as the setting for Game of Thrones. Coming into number 9, we have the trenches. This is so sad. During World War I, Europe kinda lost it. I say kind of, like it literally did. Countries turned on one another and fought a bloody battle to the death. On one side was Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Canada, and eventually Japan and the United States. On the other was Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. From October 1914 to March 1918, neither side made much ground and were stuck in a deadlock battle fought in trenches along the western front of France. It is thought that the total length of the trenches was around 2,490 kilometers. Not only did millions of people die in the trenches, they lived in them too. They were forced to live in squalid conditions. Millions and millions of men, for all intent and purpose, these long thin trenches were towns. Then, as the war was over, the trenches were abandoned, leaving a history of bloodshed and violence in the ground. This is what they looked like over 100 years ago, and now this is what they look like today. This is the battlefield from Beaumont-Hamel in France, a notable fighting spot in the Battle of the Somme. Haunting. Coming into number 8 is Calico. Here is a picture of me at Calico Ghost Town in California. I stumbled across the place on Christmas Eve in 2017. It was a very interesting time of life for me then, and coming across a ghost ghost town seemed to kind of fit with that weird and intense era. So Calico was an old silver mining town in the San Bernardino mountain range. The town was a flash in the pan of the Silver Rush era and was abandoned in 1907 with a brief return in 1915 when a cyanide plant was built to try and restore economic fortune. Sadly for Calico, it was to no avail. The town is undoubtedly mysterious and spooky up in the mountains and in the middle of the desert, which is pretty remote. It is also said that the town is haunted by not one but 5 ghosts. There's a little girl ghost who only appears to children. There's also a ghost named Tumbleweed Harris, the lady in a white gown who wanders the outskirts of town, an angry cowboy, and the ghost of a dog named Dorsey. Coming into number 7, we have the Library of Alexandria. Alexandria is a coastal city in Egypt, sitting at the south of the Mediterranean Sea. The city dates back to 331 BC and was once the thriving capital of Egypt, but was reduced to nothing more than a small fishing village in the late Ottoman period. Brutal ransackings and an earthquake destroyed a lot of the original ancient landmarks, including the Alexandria Lighthouse and Cleopatra's tomb, which has notably never been found. Most notably, however, was the biggest loss suffered by the city, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Now this was a massive library, so big that it was hailed as the most significant in the ancient world. It was said to contain the equivalent of 100,000 books, which in the early days of the written word was a lot. It's uncertain who destroyed the library, just that it's no longer there. Julius Caesar's been blamed, but so have many people who ransacked the city over its history. Moreover, while the city has been discussed a lot in literature, we don't know for sure if it ever really existed. Alexandria as a city was rebuilt eventually, and a city of the same name stands in its place, but the original landmark is by and large lost to the ground in the ocean, taking many of the secrets of the ancient world with it. Another ancient one up for you next. At number 6, we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now the Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They've been described as some of the most fantastical roof gardens of all time and were thought to have been located in Babylonia in Iraq. The gardens were believed to have been destroyed sometime after the 1st century AD, and many archaeologists have spent their lives looking for their remains. The existence is not confirmed by archaeological findings, and there have been suggestions that the gardens are mythical. That being said, they were thought to be in Iraq, and much of the country has been super ravaged by war over the years. Okay, I have to deviate from this video for a second to ask if anyone else remembers the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in Bill and Ted, because I absolutely swear that there was a Babylon bit, but I can't find it anywhere online, and rather like the gardens themselves, I'm thinking, are they mythical, or is this like a Mandela effect thing that I've just discovered? Let me know. Coming into number 5, we have Tyneham. Tyneham in England is a pretty spooky village indeed. The ghost village in South Dorset was abandoned in 1943 at the height of World War II. It was abandoned for fear of bombardment from the German forces. 225 villagers were rehomed, all of which thought that they would return after the war, but mysteriously the British government purchased the land and kept it for military training. The village is now opened at various times of the year for controlled tourism, but those who have been lucky enough to visit claim that it's very spooky indeed. In fact, some even claim that the village telephone rings even though it's disconnected from wires. The village was featured in a television show, Mysteries of the Abandoned, and this is what was said by visitors.
The village pond looks like any other village pond in England, except there's no wildlife there. There are no ducks. It's eerily empty.
Shut the front door! No ducks on the pond! Must be cursed, right? I have to say that the documentary is super dramatic and I kinda love it. They claim that it's eerie and that the church remains as it was in the 40s. Have a listen to this. I'm very, very here for the dramatic music.
Add a darker narrative. Like the cottages, which are little more than empty shells.
And these are in an unusual state of disrepair.
But where are the ducks? Questions. Coming in at number 4, we have the lost villages of the St. Lawrence. Controversially, in 1958, 9 villages were flooded along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. Now this was to make way for the St. Lawrence Seaway. The project was unpopular as 6,500 people were displaced, and of those people, the residents believed that the money that they got for their homes wasn't enough because the plans had already depressed property value. The villages were all in Ontario and are now under the water in the St. Lawrence River. Some of the areas are now popular scuba diving spots. Eerily though, it is possible difficult to spot the outlines of the villages from the water when levels are low. Another sunken city at number 3, we have the withered city of Villa Epicuén. Villa Epicuén was a popular tourist resort near Buenos Aires, Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, which meant that hopes and livelihoods had to be abandoned in the water. Can you imagine? Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuén became a sunken town. However, weirdly, the waters began to recede in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time it was totally white, stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time underwater and away from the sun, and now they're white too, and the whole thing just looks ghostly and twisted and withered. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the bank. Honestly, it looks so scary to me, but I also kinda love it. This town or city, more like, still exists but may not in our lifetime, so I want to give you a little warning at number 2. We have Venice. Venice is sinking. The historic town is made from 118 small islands connected by bridges and dates back to the 10th century BCE. The issue is here climate change and tourism. Cruise ships are turning up in the harbour, which disturbs the waters. Thousands of passengers disembark from the ships and trample the city, rarely without buying anything and contributing to the economy that could actually help save the city. The old buildings of Venice don't have stable foundations, and they're gradually subsiding into the waters of the lagoon. Marry that with tourism and overcrowding and the rise in ocean levels in general, and it seems very much on the brink. It would be devastating to lose this city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Happy Valley. Happy Valley is not a happy place to be. The town used to be known as Williamstown and is located between Syracuse and Camden in upstate New York. Founded in 1850, the town was a farming community, but it was abandoned in the Great Depression. That being said, the Depression probably wasn't the reason people left, if the rumors are to be believed anyway. It is said that the men of Williamstown angered a witch that lived on the fringes of the community. How they angered her? Well, some say they taunted her, others say they abused her. Either way, in a fit of rage, the town was suddenly struck with plague that killed a whole chunk of the population. On top of that, crops began failing. Today, those in surviving towns near Happy Valley claim that actually it is haunted and they will not venture into the abandoned spot.
So starting off this countdown, we have Ordos Kangbashi, and I apologize, I know I'm going to butcher every single name on this list. Please give me a break, okay? I suck at pronunciations, especially cities that I've never been to. So this is the most famous ghost city in China and the world's largest ghost town. Located in Inner Mongolia, Ordos Kangbashi was meant to be a modern city with a new style of architecture. There's tons of unique looking buildings, large stadiums, theaters, and big public spaces. It was actually called the Dubai of China. Just one problem. It lacks people. The city was built for 300,000 people, but only 70,000 ended up moving to live there. Then, after running out of funding, construction on the city just stopped. Nowadays, there are tons of unfinished and empty apartments. Now it's called a modern ghost town, a stillborn city and a failed utopia. If you travel the area, it is beautiful with its buildings, but the silence and the emptiness is very frightening. Not only that, but beneath the streets is a whole underground parking system, which will give you nightmares. It looks like a giant underground doomsday bunker. Moving on to number 9, we have Tianducheng. The Tianducheng is known for being a copycat of Paris. Seriously, it was designed to look like as if you are in Paris. The streets look just like the ones in France, and they have a replica of the Medici fountain. To top it all off, they even have their very own Eiffel Tower. But sadly, it wasn't as successful as they hoped, and now many of the buildings remain deserted. Now people think of it as a creepy version of France. Many visitors feel uneasy walking down the streets. The once beautiful city now has stores with cracked and worn paint, and has a bunch of creepy statues with eyes that look like they follow your every move. In fact, some stores are nothing more than walls that they painted to look like stores and storefronts with like windows with merchandise in the windows. Kinda weird, kinda creepy. In our 8th spot, we have Chang'an. On May 20th, 2011, the construction of the city of Chang'an in Yunnan was approved. 100,000 new apartments were built, but they have no occupants. You have enormous office buildings with no workers, big streets with no cars. Now it's considered one of the largest ghost towns in Asia. What's creepy is that sections of the city remain uncompleted. There are dirt roads all trashed with rubble. It literally looks like an apocalyptic area. It's very creepy, especially when it's dead silent and all you can hear is the wind whistling through the abandoned buildings. Coming in at number 7, we have the Guangdong province. The Guangdong province is home to tons of abandoned villages, but the one I want to talk about is the village of Dakito. This village is known to have a ghostly presence, and it's said to be haunted, but there's hardly any information out there on it. So I don't know what exactly happened there or why it's abandoned, but all I know is that something sinister haunts the land. Coming in at number 6, we have Ujiapu. Referred to as China's Manhattan, Ujiapu was created to be a center for world trade and finance, but more than 22 buildings are still unfinished, and there are no citizens working inside the tall buildings. A cab driver described the area as the following: "There's just nobody there. It's like having a good-for-nothing child." His words, not mine. He says at night, the area is 10 times creepier, with brightly lit roads, but no one driving on them. He claims that one time he was driving down the road when he saw headlights coming towards him, as if a car was going to crash into him head on. He braced for impact, but nothing hit him. When he looked back, there was nothing there. So what were the lights that he saw? I have no idea, but he's terrified of the area and thinks it's haunted. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Dandong New District. The new district of Dandong features a giant shopping mall, huge government offices, a basketball stadium, and 60+ apartment towers. There's even a huge Ferris wheel. It seems like a really impressive city, until you actually go there and find that it's all just for show. The Ferris wheel doesn't even work, and no one lives there. So this city is actually part of a border zone between North Korea. The Globe and Mail states, and I quote, "Part of the lure of the Dandong New District was supposed to be its proximity to Sinuiju, the North Korean city on the opposite bank of the narrow Yalu River. But since it's so close, citizens were worried that they would be exposed to possible radiation from North Korea's nuclear tests. So now, no one really wants to live there." Making our way down the list, number 4, we have Nanhui New City. Nanhui New City, formerly named Lingang New City, is located 60 kilometers southeast of downtown Shanghai. The city was said to become a mini Hong Kong, but as we know, that didn't happen. The construction of the city began in 2003 and was said to be done by 2020, but it's nowhere near completion, and some believe that it will never be completed. In fact, 8 university campuses were built, and it could house more than 800,000 people, but now it remains abandoned. In fact, it's said that in order to build the city, one homeless man's shelter was destroyed in the process, and with nowhere to go, he committed suicide. People believe that he now will haunt the area and whoever decides to live there. In our 3rd spot, we have Cafe Dien. Construction of the city began in the early 2000s. It was planned to be the solution to Beijing's pollution problem. It was going to be an eco-city, but the project was abandoned due to lack of government support and funding issues. It was built to hold millions of people, but only a few thousand live there. You got locked up abandoned hotels and unfinished buildings. One woman said, and I quote, "I was very sad when I saw how underdeveloped it was. I went back crying all the way." But due to the city's high amount of abandoned buildings, it attracts a lot of urban explorers. But sadly, a group of explorers died after a structural collapse in one of the buildings they were exploring. In our 2nd spot, we have Lanzhou New Area. Built in a sandy plateau area, some parts of the city literally look like you're in a desert. So when you first enter the city, you'll see a huge sign that says, "Welcome to the Oasis City," but it looks nothing like an oasis. The welcome sign looks like it leads to nothing. It looks very barren. But in some areas of the city, you will notice that there are replicas of the Parthenon and the Great Sphinx of Giza. And that's pretty cool, but they're still under construction. So in order to create this city, hundreds of sandy hills were bulldozed down, and some mountains were even cut down. There are some buildings, but it mainly looks like a huge sandstorm just took place and then engulfed most of the buildings. Now, some people do live there, but it's still considered a ghost city as it houses far less than anticipated. Legend goes that the ancient Egyptian god Khafre is cursing this area for having a replica of his Sphinx. Most researchers believe that the Sphinx was meant to act as a guardian for the pharaoh Khafre, whose pyramid is located beside it. So now, Khafre is mad and has made sure that the construction will never be completed and that it will never be a successful city. And in our number 1 spot, we have Mexico Lake City. I know for sure I pronounced that name wrong. The construction of the city began in 2007 and it was meant to be a highly sustainable city. The whole thing was designed to be eco-friendly and low carbon dependent. The project was described as this, and I quote, "Water is the primary element of design and acts as the heart and center of the master plan." They were going to have a huge lake that was going to be the main source of transportation. So people were going to be boating around, which was said to reduce pollution. And not only that, there were going to be canals that connected you to around the city. They expected a population of 206,000 people living there, but it was never really completed and is now an abandoned project. I mean, it was a pretty cool idea, but I don't know how many people are going to just love boating around instead of driving. Now, the city looks pretty beautiful and not creepy at all. Then again, rumor has it that the lake it was built near has been the site of multiple drownings. But of course, the government thought that was going to be bad news for their city, so they did whatever they could to try and hide the past. Starting off this countdown, we have Ruby, Arizona. Established in 1910, Ruby used to be a popular mining town. Now it's a popular and well-preserved ghost town. The population of this area started off small, but over the years it gradually increased. At its peak, it had a population of about 1,200 residents. Now, since the population number was so small, they really didn't have a proper law enforcement system. In fact, a lot of families were scared to live there. Between 1920 to 1922, Ruby and the surrounding area was the scene of 3 double homicides, known as the Ruby murders. In 1920, 2 brothers were found shot in their store. One with a bullet in his head and his back, the other brother had been shot through his left eye. Then in 1921, the store's new owner was attacked, killed, and their store was robbed. Then in 1940, the mine closed down, and the next year the town was pretty much abandoned. Coming in at number 9, we have New Idria, California. New Idria was once another popular mining area. However, over the years, mercury has been seeping into the water and ground, contaminating it. It's considered way too toxic for people to live there. On top of the mercury problem, they also have an asbestos problem. So yeah, EPA declared it not a safe area to be in, let alone live in. In our 8th spot, we have Tawerga, Libya. Back in 2011, residents of this town were forced to leave by resistance forces. Buildings were burnt and ransacked, and people's possessions were thrown about, littering the streets. There once was 30,000 people living there. Now it's home to no one, and the residents are never allowed to return home. This is one of the places you literally can't visit. The whole area is defended by a small military. You probably will be killed if you try to visit this area. Also, good luck finding it. Its main road is now erased from road signs, and there's no directional arrows telling you where to go. All that's left of this place are destroyed homes and lone cats and dogs. Moving on at number 7, we have Pyramiden, Norway. Or, as it is now called, the Soviet ghost town in the Arctic Circle. So way up in the Arctic Circle is Pyramiden. Probably said that wrong, I apologize. A once popular mining town. During World War II, this mining town was very successful. However, it fell following the downfall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Then the town was the site of a tragic accident. A plane crashed in the area, killing some of the residents. After that incident, the town could no longer support its residents, and by 1998, it was deserted. Nowadays, thanks to the cold climate, the town is pretty much preserved. The buildings are still in place. Nowadays, thanks to the cold climate, the town is pretty much preserved. The buildings are still in place, and homes look like they are ready to welcome families back. But no one wants to step foot in an area where such a big tragedy occurred. In our 6th spot, we have Ujiapu. Referred to as China's Manhattan, Ujiapu was created to be a center for world trade and finance. But more than 22 buildings are still unfinished, and there's no citizens working inside the big tall buildings. A cab driver described the area as being completely empty, and he says it's 10 times creepier at night. There's a bunch of brightly lit roads, but no one is driving on them. He claims that one time he was driving down the road when he saw headlights coming towards his car, as if a car was going to crash into him head on. He braced for impact, but nothing hit him. When he looked back, there was nothing there. So what were the lights that he saw? He has no idea, but now he thinks that the area is haunted. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Forlandia, Brazil. In 1927, Henry Ford thought it would be a good idea to create a massive rubber plantation in the jungles of Brazil. He named it Fordlandia. He designed the town to have swimming pools, a golf course, and bungalows. He hoped to get a lot of rubber from the trees of the Amazon for car tires and such. But unfortunately, his whole plan failed. The trees ended up getting a leaf fungus and then they died. Then his team and him kept getting into multiple disputes with the Brazilian laborers. So in 1945, he canceled the plans and sold it to the Brazilian government. All that remains are a couple of structures overgrown by nature. In our 4th spot, we have Pitcher, Oklahoma. Pitcher, Oklahoma was once a popular lead and zinc mining town. In fact, it was home to a number of families. But in the mid-90s, a third of the younger population suffered from lead poisoning, and they were experiencing cognitive issues. But they kind of just ignored that and continued living there until 2006. That's when it was discovered that 80% of the buildings were pretty much going to collapse at any time. In fact, one motorist died after driving into a huge hole in the ground. After they discovered that, the population dropped to only 20 people. People fled like crazy. They got the heck out of there. In our 3rd spot, we have Sanchi Pod City. Located just outside of New Taipei, this city is filled with pretty weird styled homes. These homes literally look like UFO pods stacked on top of each other. In fact, it has been nicknamed the UFO houses. So construction of the city began in 1978, and it was meant to be like a vacation resort area. But a lot of bad things happened in the area, which stopped construction. Several fatal car accidents occurred near the construction sites, and then they lost a lot of investments. So the whole thing just came tumbling down. Now it's said that the area is cursed with bad luck. This is because they bisected a Chinese dragon statue near the front gates. By doing so, it's bad luck, and that's why the project was never finished. In our 2nd spot, we have Kentubik, Uzbekistan, otherwise known as Asbestos Island. This area was where biological weapons were being tested out. One of the labs there worked with smallpox and the bubonic plague. In 1971, 10 people on the island contracted smallpox, and 3 died as a result of the testings. Then in 1988, when they banned biological weapons, they buried tons of anthrax spores in the area. In fact, it was considered the world's largest anthrax dumping grounds. Over the years, there have been attempts to decontaminate the area, but they still believe it's way too hazardous to live there. As a result, it lays abandoned. And in our number 1 spot, we have Ipetuan, Argentina. Ipetuan was once known as a perfect spa destination with its therapeutic thermal waters. In fact, since the lake was so rich in minerals, it was used to treat certain skin conditions, muscle pain, joint inflammation, and diabetes. But sadly, the area was hit hard with a bunch of rainstorms and floods. Following this, a dam broke which was protecting the area, and tons of water poured in. Residents said that they woke up to ankle-deep water in their home. The water level rose a centimeter each hour. 2 weeks later, it was 3 meters deep. By 1993, it was 10 meters deep. The village became uninhabitable and abandoned. It's said that the residents never fully recovered from the trauma of losing everything literally overnight. It's so sad. Now there are attempts to rebuild the area, but chances are nobody is going to move back to an area where the same thing could happen again.